So, Melabs, did you, when did you leave there? Why did you leave there?
Oh, they had hired two guys to build scientific instruments. They were chemists, PhDs from Stanford. Dave Burge, and I can't remember the other guy's name. But they wanted to get into the commercial side and scientific instruments, and we did some interesting things. And they put me in that department as the electronics guy, and we did some really precision temperature controllers, like a test tube temperature controller that you could control the
So you could just
yeah,
cool it, or
you can do anything you want with it, and. We also did a thing called a pulse polarograph, which was a thing that these guys, it was a kind of a mercury drop thing. It was, all this mercury, and we didn't think a second thing about it. But anyway, it was a means of analyzing different kinds of fluids, and we did one of those. But it was, I don't know. These guys were. They were slower than hell, and it just took forever to get something done, and I was getting bored. My friend Bert, the late Bert Nilsson, who I had done some other things with. Bert was a technician that tried anything, and he had some friends at Stanford, and we made all kinds of different custom things on the side in Bert's garage. One of them was a noise-operated power supply that basically they used in the behavioral patterns for rats. Because they put these rats in a maze, and if they had a routine pattern, the rats would figure it out and stand. Rather than move around, they know where to straddle and not have to do it. So with noise, it was a different deal. We made some huge power supplies in Bert's garage, and we did that. Anyway, Bert was working for a guy in Menlo Park who had a small military electronics company called Reconix. And they were right across the street from Hiller Helicopter, over there just across the bay, on the way to the Dumbarton Bridge. Mm-hmm. And so he said, why don't you, he said, the owner wants to hire an engineer, and I recommended you. He said, so can I give him your phone number? Yeah. So the guy called me. His name was Peter Strum. I went over and interviewed with him, and began a couple-year interesting part of my life, because here was a guy that, incredibly wealthy man at the time, ran this company. He had made a lot of money with Granger Associates, and then with a company called ATI, which they did a lot of military countermeasures systems. He was one of the founders of it. He also had investments in oil wells, and big investments in oil wells in Bakersfield. He was a Southern guy, highly bigoted man. He's from South Carolina. And he hired me, showed me all kinds of, he was very skilled at reducing things to the simplest form, which showed me, and I was good at that too, but he showed me an awful lot of things. Techniques, ferrites, ways to make test equipment where you don't have to spend a fortune, or ways to make test equipment because it couldn't be bought. We made various kinds of multiplexers where we'd phase match 100 of them. They'd be phase matched. I mean, not in amplitude and phase, all with a little block with a couple of connectors, resistors, and a diode, and all common sense stuff. But Peter was he had probably a not very good marriage. I don't know. I don't think he liked to be around the house. That's why he had the business. He didn't really want it to grow. He had good contacts. He had tremendous contacts at the radio science lab at Stanford, and that's where I got to meet and do work for guys like Dr. Villard, who was Mike Villard, the inventor of the over-the-horizon radar. Ron Bracewell, the Aussie guy who was, these guys were looking at phasers and stuff in outer space through that antenna farm they had up there along Skyline and along behind the campus as well. And they needed all kinds, and they were absolutely ignorant when it came to electronic design.
Okay.
They knew systems, they knew theory, they knew smart people. So they'd come to me with, we need a receiver to do this. And we did things called phase canceling receivers, where you get a strong signal from outer space, but they want to look at the sidebands 90 dB down.
Wow.
The only way you do that is two receivers, and you cancel.
You cancel the main signal.
And then you can see the sidebands, and you can see what. So we did all kinds of things like that. And Mike tried to get me to join the radio science lab as their engineer. He said he could, I could work towards a PhD, it wouldn't cost anything. And I'd had enough of Stanford anyway when I was going at Melabs. Was never too impressed, although I did a lot of classwork there. The one thing I did learn at Stanford was phase lock loops, closed loops, those sort of things. And those are things that have done well for me over many, many years.